Is your cell carrier or internet service provider spying on you? The reason this is an important question to answer is that it will inform you about the threats around you so you can decide if the threat is important or not. It also impacts your privacy choices. If you don't understand what you're protecting against, then you may be protecting nothing or wasting your time. So, do carriers spy on us? This used to be so easy to answer. Back in the old days, this was a straight yes. But now you'll need to understand where your data leaks and who takes it. Some categories of information become more significant to guard if you know who's seeing what. Big tech is in the picture as well, and you'll need to understand which of your data goes into their hands and becomes invisible to the carriers. There are also the last mile carriers, and there are the trunk carriers that aggregate the internet data over land and over undersea cables. They have different access too. So who's dipping into our data? Let's analyze this. Stay right there. I'm on the platform Odyssey.com, and I'm now one of the top creators on there. In case I get the platform, please follow me there using the link in the description. And also join my app BraxMe, which is a privacy-focused social media. My company offers protective tools like Bytes VPN, BraxMail, and now we have officially begun shipping the Brax 2 Privacy Phone, which is a phone that does not reveal your identity. If you're interested in keeping your identity and information private, these products are on my app, BraxMe. The link is in the description. There are two sides to your information on a phone. First is the phone and texting side, and then next is the internet on your data plan. These are two separate issues, and I'll make it clear for you. Let's start with the phone and texting side first. Let me give you a little bit of recent history. In 2013, Edward Snowden leaked information about mass surveillance being done to U.S. citizens. It involved a lot of parties, but clearly there was a long-time private-public partnership going on. Instead of government creating new infrastructure, the government instead just paid for it by contracting with U.S. companies. In fact, Snowden himself was just a contractor. His employment was officially with Booz Allen Hamilton, a consulting company, yet his duties were with a three-letter agency. Phone carriers have been actively accepting contracts with the intelligence agencies. One of the main programs revealed by Snowden was the PRISM program. This intelligence program captured all the phone activity and sent it to the intelligence database of the government. It included every call ever made, including all the metadata of the parties who made the call, time, length of call, and so on. I'm sure this part has not changed. Carriers have this information. However, the distribution of this data has changed. Whereas the old data was primarily for the NSA, nowadays calling information is also stored in a queryable FBI database called DCSNet, Digital Collection System Network. And this goes further. Back during the Clinton administration, a law called CALEA, Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, was enacted. This law, which took many years before it took effect, required all carriers to enable tapping of any conversation on the phone network, whether using regular packet switching or voice over IP. In fact, much of this was built directly into the packet switching infrastructure, which is called PSTN, Packet Switched Telephone Network, meaning it's integrated directly in the carrier's PSTN equipment. The law enforcement access to phone conversations is in real time and direct. Nowadays, they just connect directly with software through the internet, so no one has to request special wiretapping permissions from the carrier. I don't know how warrants are applied here, but you can see that the data interception is rampant. Just to connect this to my past videos, this part of the call interception likely is done over the carrier SS7 network. Additionally, law enforcement has the ability to intercept calls via radio using the Stingray equipment. This allows them to scan an area to look for particular traffic, then they can hone into a particular phone, identify by its carrier subscriber identity or IMSI, and then intercept that call directly. Or even possibly hack the phone in some way through this Stingray connection. This is useful to track targets where law enforcement or an intelligence operation does not know the phone number of the target. Now there's more. Several hacks to the SIM card, like the SIM jacker attack and another similar attack to the WIB features of the SIM card, are known. And these utilize secret avenues into the phone that can result in remote hacking of the phone. Whether this involves the carriers themselves is not entirely clear. However, the commands to the SIM card and the baseband modem processor goes through the carrier networks, so at the very least this traffic is allowed. For further control, in most countries, purchasing a SIM card requires some KYC or Know Your Customer rules to be satisfied. You will typically be asked to identify yourself in some way, and even purchasing SIM cards in cash is certain to be traceable even via cameras at the store you purchased it from. And even if you did your best to hide all that, it is clear that you will be identified anyway by who you call. Beyond this, Snowden also revealed later that there is voice fingerprinting. This was the kind of technology used to find terrorists in the world. Anytime you speak on any phone or internet network in the world, voice signature detection software will be able to identify you and who you're talking to. Everything that goes through the carrier phone network, called SS7, is included in what is trackable. This, of course, includes texting or SMS. So if you're fond of texting, then the carriers and the state are fond of you too. So when it comes to anything that has to do with using a phone to make a call or receive calls or doing texting, there is absolutely no evidence that you can outrun the state. The state will know all. I get asked questions relating to this, and people do all kinds of tricks to hide their phone traffic, and I can assure you that if the state wants to find you in phone traffic, they can. But using a smartphone is beyond just phone traffic. Now we have data plans, and though the state and carriers will know everything about the phone calling and texting side of things, what do they know about the internet data flowing through a phone? This is the part that gets more complicated. Can the carrier see all your internet traffic? Do they know what websites you visit? Do they know what you do on each site? Do they know you're trying to hide? Can they interrupt your internet communication selectively, like block VPN traffic? Stuff done by the Great Firewall of China. Before we get into that, we'll have to understand how the internet traffic flows to your device. Back in the very old days, phones were controlled in the USA by one company, AT&T, which was a monopoly. This was broken up in 1982 by US regulators, and it was split into multiple regional baby bells, although AT&T retained the long-distance side. Over the next few decades, this got reorganized with so many mergers and acquisitions. Today, there are only 3 phone carriers, and they are AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. When AT&T was broken up in 1982, it still retained all the national infrastructure for telecommunications, while the other carriers only focused on local service. The telephone infrastructure eventually converted into the internet data infrastructure, but clearly it was still AT&T running the show. Today, AT&T is still the largest telecommunications company, although the player that reconstituted AT&T was actually one of its baby bells, which is Southwestern Bell, or SBC, and then they took the name AT&T again. The significance of AT&T's involvement is in the early internet times. Today we get internet through our phone carriers or through our cable providers. These are called ISPs, or Internet Service Providers. But the ISP's reach is only local. When they need to reach outside of a city, they have to connect to a trunk where all internet is combined for all carriers. Rather than each carrier building their own nationwide trunk, the ISPs contracts with a company that handles the distribution of internet traffic around the country. This relationship is called peering. Each telecommunication system is a peer, and they connect to each other, and that allows traffic to flow through each other to the end users. Now, it so happens that AT&T is the major peering trunk in the USA, and AT&T then interconnects with other trunk providers around the world and the USA. Either by planning or by serendipity, AT&T has the most ability to intercept most of the internet traffic in the USA. This, of course, was another boon to the intelligence community. As documented in an article by the publication Intercept, AT&T has 8 peering stations around the USA. And in secret rooms in these facilities, there is equipment to basically scan all traffic based on the target word list and IP address ranges. Foreign internet traffic interacting in the USA and anyone saying words on the target list will be forwarded to the NSA Utah data center. In addition to direct data access via AT&T, the government has the same ability to intercept traffic through the various internet trunk providers worldwide, including the ability to intercept undersea cables. In summary, it is clear that the US government has access to internet traffic worldwide. Now, although this sounds ominous, the world has changed and this is no longer black and white. Let me proceed. The problem that I'm certain the intelligence agencies have encountered is encryption. To date, it is clear that 90% of the web traffic is encrypted by HTTPS. When you go to your browser and type HTTPS instead of HTTP, then the ISP and parties in between, like AT&T, know your IP address, know the website you're connecting to, but no party can see what you are doing on the website. Thus, carriers have lost a big amount of information they can have access to. If you use a VPN, it's even more restricted. A carrier can see you're connecting to a server that's encrypted, but they cannot see any other website you are connecting to. They can assume it's a VPN since it's a single connection, but they don't actually know that directly unless they go through another process of examining your data called deep packet inspection. I'll get back to that in a moment since it usually involves the internet trunk providers like AT&T, not your ISP. Last year, in February 2021, I uncovered a very strange event that happened right after the US election. For several days, VPN access was blocked in the entire USA. No problem with accessing a VPN abroad, but within the USA, you couldn't access certain VPNs. The way the block was implemented was by basically blocking traffic directly to a particular port number. In all internet activity, the traffic going to a server is identified by a port. For example, web traffic is port 443, email traffic to your device is typically 993 and 587, traffic to control servers using SSH is 22, and so on. By default, VPN traffic uses 1194. Now, you're not forced to use 1194, but this is the default port for a VPN back then. During this week in February 2021, the traffic to port 1194 was blocked for around 5 days. Then the traffic was opened up again after. Now, what was that? A demonstration of capabilities? A demonstration that someone in government can control traffic? In order to implement this, in my analysis, the traffic block to port 1194 could have only occurred at the internet trunks, not at the local ISP level, and this was done using deep packet inspection equipment to identify traffic to port 1194. For example, they could have performed the block at the AT&T peering stations. This is interesting to note, but unfortunately for them, they demonstrated that no one should be obvious about VPN traffic anymore, so I guarantee that no VPN provider passes traffic through 1194 anymore. It will be hidden in various common ports, but this demonstrates the control and capability of a carrier, perhaps at the behest of government. And note that although you can encrypt the data, the port and IP address of the target cannot be encrypted, so it is visible to a deep packet inspection device. And I'm sure this is how it works in the Great Firewall of China. Now, although most web traffic is encrypted and large amounts of other traffic like FTP is no longer used and has shifted to encrypted versions, there is still a lot of traffic that the AT&T peering stations can capture. Most of this has to do with email. Although your personal connections with your email provider are secure, the communications between the servers themselves to transfer email from point to point is still wide open. This is called MTA to MTA traffic. So be forewarned that anything you send in email is likely being collected and read by the carriers and by the state. This is the biggest hole you need to be aware of outside of phone calls and texting. There is some growing proportion of email transfer that is beginning to get encrypted, but that goes to big tech, and big tech gives its own direct access to intelligence agencies via another program revealed by Snowden called Muscular. So this is how they get past encryption. In other words, always assume email is being read. But this is through big tech, not the carriers. In general, what you will observe today is that the ISPs no longer have access to large amounts of data about your internet transactions. The biggest data they have is this. They know which websites you are visiting. Much of the DNS or domain name services is still provided by the carrier. Carriers will often override the DNS traffic intended to go elsewhere like Google, and then it will redirect it to their own servers. This is easy for them to do. They identify the traffic intended for port 53, which is DNS, then they redirect that to their server. Google responded to this by implementing DNS over HTTPS on Androids, so the threat from the carrier has now been replaced by a threat from Google. So big tech has been actively declawing the capability of carriers over the years so that big tech can hoard the internet data and phone carriers can hoard the phone data. But big tech fights back by promoting apps like WhatsApp, which basically hides the data from carriers and moves it into the hands of Facebook, for example. Apple has basically commandeered the texting data, so it goes to iMessage and skips the carriers, so carriers cannot see iMessage. That's for Apple to see. It's an interesting battle to watch. There's a basic consolidation going on, and parties are keen on protecting what they already can get. A little problematic with the companies like Verizon, which also owns Yahoo. So that company has access to big tech data and phone data. To me, a carrier poses some extra danger. The extra danger is that they know who you are exactly, and cable provider technicians physically visit your home. The cell operators have your credit card info, know your IP address at all times, and know each moment that you access the internet. They may not know exactly what's going on with the internet data, but they have timestamps. And that usually has been enough to catch individuals targeted by the state. Those timestamps, for example, allowed the FBI to catch the Silk Road guy, Ross Ulbricht, by allowing the timestamps to identify him. So in a nutshell, the special capability of carriers is to supply identity data. Now, how do you limit the information gathered by the carriers? Many of you will take steps to limit the data collection by big tech and would like to do the same with carriers. So we'll discuss what you can do. Obscuring your internet data from the carrier is not hard, and this process will not only hide the direct traffic that goes through the internet to other sites, but also handles hiding the DNS traffic. This is done by a VPN. When you use a VPN, you basically disrupt what the ISP can see. A good VPN will redirect not just your regular web traffic, email traffic, and so on, but the VPN will aggregate your DNS queries by having it come from the VPN server side, so that causes it to lose its original identity. Now, given the little amount of information already collected by the ISP from your device, you may decide that it is not important to do anything, meaning do not use a VPN on the phone. To me, this is an acceptable policy when you're talking about cell data. On cell data, your IP address is shared so it does not identify you to third parties. And most of all, your traffic, if not all, is encrypted on your device. The only exclusion is DNS traffic, and that can be directed elsewhere. Hopefully not to Google, though. Next important point. If you use a voice over IP provider, hopefully not one controlled in your country, then it is possible to obscure even the voice traffic. For example, if you use Signal to make calls and do texting with your friends and family, you are basically completely hidden. When you use an alternate encrypted app to do communications, which are intended to replace voice and text, then you are removing that data from access by the carrier. I recommend using Signal between family and friends, people who already know you because they already have your phone number. It took me a while, but I have my entire family, including siblings, communicating with me on Signal, so we basically disappeared from the phone network when we interact with each other. Now, what about talking to other people with normal phone numbers? Fortunately, there are options, and one of the main options is voice over IP providers. There are many voice over IP providers that are tied directly to the government, like Skype and Google Voice. But as an example, Viber is outside of the USA. Now, voice over IP itself is not an encrypted protocol normally, and Viber HQ could, in theory, intercept each call as well. The question, though, is if they are legally bound by the CALEA law to open up their network to the US government. Since they are in Luxembourg, then in theory, no. Any calling, even over voice over IP that needs to reach out to a regular phone number, still is possible to wiretap. Once you are on the SS7 packet switch network, then you are fair game once again. But it does offer an obscurity layer. Not perfect, but it has potential use depending on the threat. The best solution, of course, is to never use the packet switching network. The more you limit communications to a regular phone number, the less data will exist about you on that channel. I would imagine that Snowden would never use any phone, not even a public phone or burner phone. A strategy for completely safe communications platforms is to completely detach from the phone network and texting. A little difficult to do because big tech keeps forcing us to use 2FA with texting and keeps requiring phone numbers for identification on their platforms. The way to detach from the phone carriers while still having mobile access is to get a data-only plan. If you don't use the phone and text features, then there's no traffic to track. Several companies actually implement this as a secure strategy, particularly for company security. They use phones that are locked from installing any unapproved app. Communications is limited to an internal communications app only. An example of how to do this is to set up a private XMPP for messaging servers and a private Jitsi server for video. And I have videos on both XMPP and Jitsi. And then using a data-only SIM card. So you're still free to communicate over XMPP, which is end-to-end encrypted and also under your control, and a Jitsi video server that is under your control. A very good and secure communication solution. In summary, the carriers have complete access to phone calls and texting and share that with the government. It is expected that this occurs in all countries. Carriers, though, have less and less capability to access your internet traffic, and the last mile ISPs have even less information. Most of the data leaks from email and keyword spying are at the peering stations. So each time you keep yourself from making a phone call using the normal packet switch telephone network, or PSTN, then you're depriving the carrier of data. Each time you choose to use an alternative messaging app other than texting, you are depriving the carrier of data. Each time you use a VPN, you are depriving the carrier of internet data. The carrier is definitely a mass surveillance threat through the packet switch telephone network, but today we have other telecommunication options and just need to change habits to blunt them. Thank you for watching.